what I'd like to talk about is the work we've been doing in our office over the last 10 years. We are architects. We actually also do haircuts, but this is our office in Copenhagen. It's located inside a former Carlsberg factory where they used to produce the least interesting part of the beer, the bottle cap. But I think it's part of this greater phenomenon that has been interesting over us the last decade, is that it is a former factory space, like a piece of industrial infrastructure, that because it's not designed for human beings but for big manufacturing machines, it has like large spans and tall ceiling heights that makes it incredible for work or for life. So that's this sort of a general phenomenon. Typically, social infrastructure refers to kindergartens and nurseries and stuff like that, but we mean it much more literally, like infrastructural projects that have positive social and environmental side effects. And we all know that a piece of infrastructure like a bridge can have a negative impact on a society. This is where Granville Bridge touches downtown Vancouver, and it slices the city up in these useless triangles. And we were asked to sort of look if we could turn it into the seed for a nice neighborhood. So we started like mapping the constraints, the setbacks from the bridge. Then there's like a 100-foot setback because the city wants to secure that nobody looks straight into the traffic from the bridge. Then there's a park where we don't want to cast any shadows. And finally, we're left with a tiny footprint of like a sort of 6,500 square foot triangle, almost too small to build on. So then we got the idea that if a 100-foot setback has to do with the minimum distance, once we get 100 feet up in the air, we can come back out, sort of almost as if sort of someone is pulling a curtain aside, sort of welcome to Vancouver. Or like a weed growing through the cracks in the asphalt and blossoming when it gets light and air. It's very similar to the Flatiron. It's a child of the sort of diagonal of Broadway intersecting the orthogonal grid of Manhattan. Then because of the rising real estate prices and steel structure and the advent of the elevator, suddenly it became the landmark of the whole neighborhood. We're just taking that idea maybe one step further. Also, underneath the bridge, we're trying to turn the underside of the bridge into a positive. And anyone who's been to Vancouver knows that having an urban umbrella could actually be quite nice. And then we're working with some local artists, including Rodney Graham, to turn the underside of the Granville Bridge into what you could call the Sistine Chapel of street art, like an art gallery turned upside down. But essentially trying to reinvent the negative impact of the infrastructure into something good for the community. Another example is that once a piece of infrastructure gets decommissioned, like our office, it can be reinvented. A project we're doing, or we built in Copenhagen next to Hamlet's castle Kronborg, is the Danish Maritime Museum. The museum used to be inside the castle, but when they gained UNESCO World Heritage, they had to put it somewhere else, and it was suggested to put it inside the dry dock where they used to build ships. But we had a dilemma because UNESCO said that we couldn't stick as much as a foot out of the ground to not block the view of the castle. The museum wanted an architectural masterpiece to attract visitors, so we got the idea to turn the dock inside out, in a way use the museum to preserve the dock. All we needed to do was design a series of bridges. We could actually build the bridges on a shipyard in China, the way you build ships and lift them into place. One of the bridges slopes with an accessible slope because we couldn't even put an elevator building because it would block the view of the castle. So you can sort of walk on this lazy ramp into the exhibition. You have like intimate spaces, vast spaces, and you have this sort of encounter between the lightness of the glass and the steel and the heaviness and the heritage of the concrete dock. The auditorium where the seats continue under the stage, becoming an auditorium for children. You have the cafe where you look through the different layers of glass of the bridges. And not only the auditorium has become a cultural venue, but actually the dock itself has amazing acoustics because of the hard walls and the open ceiling. So like this piece of old infrastructure has become a cultural venue next to Hamlet's castle. Also, you have this sort of horizon where below you have this contemporary museum and above the history of the castle. This is this sort of inverse Titanic moment. So not only can a piece of decommissioned infrastructure get reinvented to become a cultural building, but maybe a cultural building can also be a piece of infrastructure. We're doing a museum in a sculpture park in Norway. And we could place the museum anywhere we wanted. And we suggested, why don't we make the museum the bridge that takes you over the river and turns the whole promenade through the park into a single loop. So you walk on the paths, you walk into to the museum. You have the skylit sculpture gallery where the skylights turn 90 degrees and become a view of the old mill. And then you continue. So in a way, you can see it as both a museum building and a bridge and actually a sculpture. It's almost like the biggest sculpture in the sculpture park. You might not suspect that it's a building from certain angles. So then we leave Scandinavia, and 6 years ago I moved to New York because we got invited to look at a site on the Upper West Side in Hell's Kitchen. And we got the idea to try to combine the density of a Manhattan skyscraper with the typical communal space of a Copenhagen courtyard, or essentially try to see what would a court scraper look like. So we did put this like typical Copenhagen courtyard on the waterfront. We lifted it up to 500 feet in the northeast corner, creating this sort of striking new silhouette on the waterfront, opening up to the south and the west for views and sunshine. So the courtyard actually has the same proportions as Central Park, only it is 13,000 times smaller. Sort of a bonsai Central Park. And then it has the height of a handrail on one side and the height of a high-rise in the other. This was our first sort of rendering of the project. This is what it looks like today. The first 50 residents have already moved in. And essentially, it's just like sort of trying to combine the sort of communal space of the courtyard with the density of a skyscraper that creates this like rather striking new silhouette on the waterfront. This is the view from the airplane landing in Newark, a view that makes the architect very happy when he returns to. But then, having arrived in New York 2 years after we came here, Sandy arrived and sort of shut down most of Lower Manhattan. According to a New York cartoonist, it gave rise to a new neighborhood in Manhattan. And the basic sort of science is simple. Because of rising temperatures, wind speeds are accelerating, which means that the eastern seaboard of the United States are being hit more frequently by heavier and heavier storms. And because of the funnel shape of the New York Bight, storm surge is being pushed into the mouth of the Hudson River, putting 50% of the city at risk. And we were invited by HUD, the Housing and Urban Development Department of America, to look at making the 12 miles of contiguous waterfront protection of Lower Manhattan in a way that it wouldn't become a wall segregating the life of the city from the water around it. And we looked at the High Line. And the High Line is actually today the second most frequented park in New York, only superseded by Central Park, which is infinitely bigger. And it is essentially a piece of decommissioned train tracks that have now become with sort of social and environmental programs. So we thought, what if we could design the resiliency infrastructure of Manhattan so that it actually comes with premeditated positive social and environmental side effects? And when you look at the development of New York as a city, it has very much been shaped by the clash of these two titans. On one hand, you have Robert Moses, the power broker, this public servant who was behind a lot of the major sort of public works of New York, including highways, housing projects, and parks. But often with a devastating impact on the local community, he tried to run the Trans-Manhattan Highway through Greenwich Village, and he encountered resistance from Jane Jacobs, who was living in the village, and she rallied the local community, and in a sort of David-Goliath moment, she defeated the plans and saved the village. So we were thinking that perhaps the dry line, as we've called this project, could be conceived as the love child of Robert Moses and Jane Jacobs. Because to resist an incoming flood, you need 12 miles of sort of contiguous and sort of top-down hard engineering. But to make it socially successful, it needs to happen in a close dialogue with the local community. So we actually devised an idea where, on one hand, we could take the hard engineering necessary to save us against the next Sandy, but then to design it in close dialogue with different representatives from the local communities inhabiting the neighborhoods along the Big U, or the dry line. And I'd like to show you a short 3-minute film where you can see people from the community that we worked with, hear their experiences from Sandy, hear their concerns and dreams for their future waterfront, and what it's going to look like in a few years.
That was actually why Sandy was so bad, is because of the phase of the moon, it was already a very large high tide, as well as the storm surge coming in with the wind and the tide lining up perfectly to give us 14-foot tides instead of 8-foot.
The most shocking part of Hurricane Sandy was the fact that it exceeded expectations.
I think the sheer magnitude of it caught a lot of people off guard.
When Hurricane Sandy came, we were not prepared at all. I mean, not even the slightest.
Yeah, it was like an alien invasion of water. And not the good kind of water.
So yeah, I mean, it came right in front where there was literally boats on 14th Street floating in front of our window.
We had a sub-basement level office a block from here, and it was totally covered in water for 2 days. So we lost everything. Everything.
We're really concerned about another storm and the flooding that's possible, and we think that the next time it's going to come even further inland.
I'd like to see some type of flood protection in this area. That's going to happen. We're vulnerable, obviously, being this close to the water.
Something that just brings like more walks, different walks of life, you know, another escape from just the busyness and the hustle and bustle.
There's this great space that could really become community space, cultural space, and active uses.
Everyone enjoys space. And in New York and other congested cities, it's hard to come by.
Anything that makes the cities greener is just such a wonderful thing for not only the environment, but the people that live in the city too, to be able to be around that space.
The plans, the berming, the sense of how it can become into the natural landscape itself, how we want to program that is really the next challenge. We are the link, we're the tip, in a sense, of the Big U. It's important that the entire waterfront of Lower Manhattan build in the plans that have been put forward, because we can not only fortify this great city of New York, but be a model for cities all over the world.
So the dry line is actually going through, and we're breaking ground on stage 1 in 2017. Maybe just to give you one last example that's being built right now in my old hometown, Copenhagen, as a real example of social infrastructure. It's a building that I think could be the landmark of Copenhagen in a few years, but it's not a royal palace or a cultural palace. It is a power plant that turns household waste into electricity and district heating. When you look at domestic trash, 1 ton of trash equals 1 2/3 of an oil barrel of energy value. but they work on an economy of scale. They're like very big and ugly buildings. They cast shadows on the neighbors. They block the views. This is going to be the tallest and biggest building in Copenhagen, right next to the marina and right where the locals go water skiing. So we were thinking, how can we make this an asset to the community? And speaking of skiing, Danes love to ski. We have snow, but we have absolutely no mountains. But apparently we have mountains of trash. So we have to go 6 hours by car to the south of Sweden to find alpine skiing. Because of the size of our power plant, we can do 2/3 of this on the roof of the power plant. So we designed the roof complete with sort of ski slopes, ski lifts, hiking paths, pine trees, you name it. Miraculously, we won the competition on this idea. So suddenly we had to deliver. It's going to be twice the length of an Olympic halfpipe. And you might remember that in Sochi, Denmark won 0 medals. We hope to sort of improve on that statistic. Now we can actually sort of practice at home. Also, it'll be a public park, free for all. You can do picnics. You can enjoy the view of the otherwise horizontal city of Copenhagen. You're going to have the tallest climbing wall in the world, 300 feet of vertical danger. Basically, you can say it's almost realizing an idea of creating cities and buildings like man-made ecosystems, because not only do we harvest available resources, daylight, air flows, waterfall, but also together with the city of Copenhagen, it forms a metabolism that converts waste into resource. It's currently under construction. It's going to be a pretty epic contribution to my old hometown. This is like the view from the slope. The reason we could win the competition is that the coolest thing about this power plant is that it's the cleanest waste-to-energy power plant in the world. The smoke that comes out of the chimney is completely non-toxic. It contains only a little bit of steam and a little bit of CO2. But the coolest thing is going to be completely invisible. You would almost have to like put pamphlets out to make people understand that this is a new, completely new kind of technology. But by turning the roof into this public park, it becomes blatantly obvious for everybody that you actually have literally clean mountain air on the roof of the power plant. You don't have to be far away from it. It's actually totally safe and clean. To take this like one step further, we designed the chimney of the power plant in such a way that it accumulates steam, and then at regular intervals, it puffs a gigantic smoke ring or a ring of steam. So rather than being, the typical tail of smoke being a symbol of pollution or problem, this becomes a celebration that every time we've saved the emission of 1 ton of CO2, we celebrate it by puffing a smoke ring. Again, you come up with these ideas, and then you win, and you have to deliver. And actually, like, there are no sort of giant smoke ring emitting manufacturers in the yellow pages. So we had to do a series of tests.
Yes! Fucking A! Der er kraftedeme ikke noget at diskutere. Nu tror jeg sgu på det. Det er fandme godt. Ej, hvor er det vigtigt. Hvor er det vigtigt.
So, you can say that on one hand, it seems silly to spend so much energy on puffing smoke rings out of a factory chimney, but I think the smoke ring is a nice symbol of this idea that at its core, architecture is, you can call it the art and science of turning fiction into fact. That you sit in the studio and you sort of brainstorm crazy ideas. And then you then spend the next decade often of trying to sort of apply for permits or sort of run through the numbers, raise funds, solve all the technical issues, and then sort of after 5 or 10 years, suddenly it goes from being pure fiction into concrete reality, and it actually becomes what the world is. It has this sort of world-changing ability, and I like this idea in 2017 when the power plant is open. And someone visits Europe, and they come back, and they'll sort of they'll tell us, Europe is an interesting place. You know, if you go to Venice in Italy, the streets are paved with water and they sail in gondolas through the streets. And in Denmark, they ski on their power plants that turn waste into electricity and heating, and where the chimneys puff giant smoke rings. And that's just how it is in Denmark. So I think it's also like a good reminder that whenever we are sort of invited to intervene, and I think this transcends architecture, whenever we are invited to intervene in the world, in the case of architecture, to build a building or design a public space, not only do we have the possibility, but we actually have the responsibility to make the world we live in a little bit more like our dreams.